This week on Theater Talk.
There's nothing like you two.
Thank God.
Really? Are you old enough to remember Ma and Pa Kettle?
Yeah.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation. From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm the show's producer, Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
And aren't we lucky, Michael, that Dick Cavett has stuck around?
We were having a lot of fun last week with Dick Cavett, who has a new book out, Dick Cavett Talk Show. We ran out of time talking to him, so we invited him back for a second round with Dick Cavett. And welcome back to Theater Talk.
You know, I didn't have my keys last time I was here, and I have been sleeping with friends all this time, and I have the same clothes on that I had then. Sleeves rolled the same, and I promised you this would be gone, but I'm beginning to get fond of it.
You haven't changed a bit, darling, since I saw you last.
Haven't changed a bit. No, haven't aged much.
Now, Dick, when we ended the last time we were talking to you, we were just getting to Richard Burton, one of the all-time great guests.
Oh, yeah. I forget how Burton happened to come up, but
the drink card.
Yeah.
We'd been talking. Oh, yes, we've been talking about how essential to a British chat show was the drinks trolley in the green room. And I had guests come on reeling in England, but it also produces some very interesting and sometimes otherwise unobtainable words and phrases out of people and information, which they later awaken and find themselves in the papers having said and weren't aware of it. I had Sir Lloyd George, was he of the time, was he knighted? Phenomenally British politician known for being a drunk. I think that's the polite term for what he was. One time he was just abused for having voted for something the wrong way. And he said, "You can't blame me, I was drunk at the time." Can you imagine getting away with that in America?
Now, was Burton drunk, though, when he did the show with you?
No, that's a good point. Burton was, and I say this having read that wonderful biography that deserves much more acclaim than I've seen, with not a very good title. I think it's called Ferocious Love. But it's the book about Burton and Taylor. And Miss Maureen Dowd turned me on to it, having watched my Burton shows on my column. They were the videos of the 4 half hours. Were there. And the book tells you how to find them. But he was not drinking. And when he was, it might not have been that noticeable. But the quantities that he drank, it's a miracle he made it into his, you know how many decades
50s,
he lived?
I think,
in his 50s. But he was scintillating, wonderful, hypnotic.
Were you intimidated by him at all? Did you know him?
Not in the least. The instant I knew him only because 2 weeks earlier I had gone summoned to come back to his dressing room in Camelot, the revival, and see him and see how he liked me or whatever, I guess. And we got on him right away. He immediately put a long Marlboro in his mouth and said, these are going to be with me to the end of my days, I'm afraid. And then they weren't only what killed him, but then he chatted with me, and then we left, crossed the darkened stage that I had just seen Camelot in. And you know the ghost light in theater terms, the dim sort of bulb on a pole, was all there was in the entire theater. And he stopped next to it. And he looked at some imaginary friend, I guess, or something in the balcony and began, "Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heavens of invention," and did the Henry V prologue for me.
For you.
And maybe a press agent who was the one. Talk about front row seats. I just got goose flashing out thinking about it. But then he came on. He didn't want an audience. I was very sorry.
And you usually had an audience?
On the PBS show, I did, yeah. And I said to him, I'll tell you what, risking, I think, why don't we have one there? If it's in any way bothersome, we'll tell them that because of a sound problem, we're going to have to ask them to leave and invite them back to another show or something. So he said, well, all right. And he was there for a half hour. And when it started, right away he got a laugh, and every muscle in his face seemed to relax.
I very rarely watch talk shows, but when I do, I'm very conscious of the people's shoes, because they always cross their legs like this. Oh, let's try that.
That's right. It seems to be a rule.
And the shoes are always in front of the people. And I become so fascinated by the shoes, and I forget to look at the faces. So I thought I'd try with my socks.
That's right.
But maybe they're attracting more attention now, do you think, than...
I don't know. I like the idea that talk shows
I'll
are...
do that.
Have become...
And he had the best time, and so I asked him if he'd come back right then, technically. So we did a second night's show then, and then a third night's show then, and then a fourth night's show then. And whenever I look at them, I think, why did I lose the guts to say, we got to do a fifth one? Because he talked away another show in the green room afterwards.
And have the week.
Of course.
They have the week.
Now, he was very sick. Didn't realize, so he had a very bad operation right after that. He was praised in Camelot for his economy of motion. And on one of these shows, he talked about one of his goals as an actor was to do the least and convey the most in that least. Line reading, physically, whatever. That was interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know, he may not even realize at that moment that it applied to his slow movements in Camelot, which were forced on him by a terrible thing back there. He had a laminectomy.
What's that?
And I asked, that's what I said to a doctor. And he said, well, it's probably best described as we go in through your throat and take out part of your back.
Hey.
So he had this awful operation. And I only learned recently that it was not a success and that he suffered a lot from it. He also was hemophiliac and diabetic, things nobody
Oh
knew.
my God. Oh, that
And
was the
dra-
alcohol.
I'm sorry, epileptic. He
Oh
was
my God.
epileptic and diabetic.
He looks on the show, the famous show you did with him, though, he looks as though he looks a little worn down by life. And
Absolutely, that was a lived-in face.
Yeah, he just looks tired.
The face looked not ravaged, but
Yeah.
damaged.
Yeah.
I remember Peter O'Toole once, there was a show with him saying that, I said, can you guys really drink all night and show up and work? And he said, not as a rule, it wasn't a good idea. But they did often. These legendary drunks like Burton and dear Jason Robards and a lot of people. And the great Rosemary Harris disabused me of the myth that they can drink all they want and give a perfect performance.
Well, that is the myth, though. What did she
Yeah.
say to you about
People
that?
love to talk about, oh, John Barrymore, I read his biography years ago. They'd have to hold him up in the wings from falling, and he'd hear his cue and march out.
Do a beautiful Hamlet, a brilliant Hamlet, yeah. What did Rosemary Harris say about that?
Horse feathers, is it? Yeah. Is the right answer to that. A friend of mine saw Barrymore in his sad latter years, and it said it was a play, a dreadful play that he toured in for money for booze, and he would have to do a speech here at the table, stand, whatever, kind of get a little backwards movement and then let the momentum take him to the next piece of furniture, which he had to take hold of to stay upright. And he would ad-lib about just being drunk. But anyway, how did I get way off on this? Burton, at that time, I learned in the book, was in his one long non-drinking spells. She made it a little harder for him. She's
Elizabeth.
a big drinker.
Elizabeth Taylor?
Yes. And she kept drinking while he was trying desperately
Oh
to
my God,
stop a
yeah.
few times, which psychologists might have something to say about. But she loved him, and he her, and he married her again.
All right.
By the time it was the third show, I said, dare I bring up the name Elizabeth Taylor? And he talked about her quite interestingly. And but better than that was when I said, are you willing to talk about booze? I may have said it in those words. And he delivers to me and then into the camera, really kind of skillful use of both, a speech about drinking and booze. And I know what you're going through, believe me, he said to people, and you can pull yourself out of it, and it's a nightmare. I remember the late, great Gene Stafford, writer, once saying to me, alcohol is my enemy and my seducer.
Speaking of the drink trolley and substance abuse, you had on Sly Stone, who seemed to be in an altered state of consciousness.
Yeah. Now, you must have bought, and you know how I hate to plug, my Rock Icons DVD,
You bet.
which has all of them on
You
there.
bet.
The rock acts loved me. I never quite understood it. I loved Janice and she, me, and we just had 5 shows were wonderful.
Oh, I remember her and Raquel Welch.
How do you know an entire audience is homosexual? Do you look down the aisle and everyone has a
Oh,
hand
I
on a
didn't
hip?
mean that.
How can you?
Well, hell, it wasn't all homosexual because Janice was there.
Wow.
Thank you, baby. Thank you.
That was a
wait,
brilliant statement on what is sexy and what is not.
But I have to ask you though, is this
well stated.
Thank you.
now is this story that's often told about you and Janis Joplin? Is it true or is it not that after the taping you guys went off and had a night together?
We had dinner.
Did you sleep
No,
with Janis
we
Joplin?
had dinner. We had, we went to, well, I took her to Easy Rider. She just finished taping and she said, have you seen this movie? And I said, no, let's go see it. And then the car that took me home took me there, took us there. And what I remember later was we went to Elaine's, speaking of dead people, and Elaine greeted her wonderfully. She'd never been there. And conversation stopped when Janice, in all her feathers and everything, entered Elaine's, particularly a restaurant where you know, people were used to seeing everybody.
Right. But the story
That
was
famous remark of Elaine's, where's the men's room? And some guy said, and she said, turn right at Michael Caine.
But so you just went to dinner with Janis Joplin because the story that always made the
No,
rounds
not just
was that,
now. This was years ago.
Right. But the story that always made the
Can you
rounds.
tell
that
how I'm-
You had an affair with Janis Joplin, or you slept with her after taping the talk show.
What sort of question is that?
Yeah, I know. I want to hear about Sly Stone.
What category is that? You've got women here dying to hear about Sly Stone, and all you want is my tawdry affairs and my
I just have to ask you because
private
everyone always
life.
that's the story that always gets talked about when they mention Dick
Well, Henry
Cavett.
Kissinger always said that fame is an aphrodisiac. And you know now that it's true, and don't pretend you don't.
I see. I'm not gonna get a straight answer out of you on this one.
I think I heard Gore Vidal say once in a similar motion, I think I'm going to draw the veil of secrecy over that for the moment. But I'm sure people have already come to their own conclusions. God knows I have. Yes.
So what do
Sly
you think,
Stallone-
Sly Stone?
There's a side of you I haven't seen before.
Yes, you're right. So Sly Stone,
Yes.
what do you think he was on, and where did he get it?
I don't know. That was
Not in your drink trolley, did he?
nothing we supplied was quite that volatile or whatever. I don't
tell
know.
us about
Sly
that.
was
What
it
was
was
he doing?
nice, and it was. I couldn't. I wish I'd come up with the line Dave Letterman later did it with what's his name. That it's a shame you couldn't be here tonight.
With the
You know who I mean.
not River Phoenix, but
Joaquin. Yeah. Anyway, no, Sly was pretty monosyllabic, and his polysyllables didn't make great sense either. And we're in, I don't know what language, or make that plural.
but he loved you. He kept saying how much he loved you.
I mean, you know what I mean? Boom! Right on. For the thing, bro. No, for real. For real. Hey, Dick.
Yeah, yes.
Dick.
Yes,
Dick.
sir. Yes,
hey,
sir.
Dick.
You have
great.
my entire attention.
Hey, Dick.
Yeah.
You're great.
Yeah, he kept saying how much he loved me, and
Did you sleep with him too?
I think there won't be time for that. Meet me afterwards. I know Sly had ingested certain parts of the chemical table or pharmacopoeia that night, and he had a little problem communicating. He came back and did a splendid show some later that year. He was okay then.
Now, we have to talk, though, about the shows you had where people went at each other, because a lot of the famous ones where you've got Gore Vidal and Norman Mailer.
We all know that I stabbed my wife many years ago. We do know that, Gore. You were playing on that. Now, come on.
I want to forget about it. Listen,
Well, no, you don't want to forget about it. You're a liar and a hypocrite.
That's a show that won't die.
And
It's
Janet
just-
Flanner, we have to put her in there because
Yeah,
she was
wonderful
the
Janet
great one.
Flanner from
For me,
New Yorker.
rewatching it, Janet Flanner steals that
Yes.
show.
If you can,
God.
and if you could just sort of, for people who haven't YouTubed it lately, just give a little sense of what that.
Or don't know who Janet Flanner is.
Oh
was
yeah,
like.
true. There might be more of, maybe an equal number. Janet Flanner was the, by then rather dowager aged, but in no sense reduced mentally, decades-long letter from Paris writer in the New Yorker under the pseudonym Genet, G-E-N-E-T, without a circumflex, as in the playwright. But she just wrapped Norman, belligerent and alcoholized as he was that night, around her little finger whenever she wanted to. And he admitted it. It's almost in the air. There was one wonderful moment where, how did it come about? She said suddenly,
You act as if you were the only people here.
Aren't we?
They are here. He's here. I'm here. And I'm becoming very, very bored.
My.
and kissed her beautifully white-gloved hands to Norman. And then they cut to a shot of Norman.
Did you have a sense that Gore and Norman, before the show even started, were going to, and did you cast them deliberately to try and provoke them to try to get those fireworks?
I was waiting to see if you were going to say, with your gesture, butt heads, because I learned later, going home in a cab with Gore, that Norman had come in and done the macho headbutt thing to him, nearly knocking him out.
Really?
Gore had come in and placed a hand on Norman's shoulder and said something like, "Good to see you, old friend," or something. I don't know. And Gore did that, and Norman, and shall I get some of these names right? Gore then said to him, "You are absolutely crazy." And some would not dispute that, and that was the middle warm-up in the green room. I didn't see any of it, that I learned about later before the show. And then Norman came on to eviscerate Gore about some stuff he'd written about him in the New York Review of Books, which Norman touchingly seemed to think everyone watching would have read. It was a hell of a show, and yeah, but that was a case of a booking that turned out to be even more than you might have predicted. I mean, can you imagine now saying, you want to see a great 90 minutes of television? It has 3 authors.
Yeah, and Janet Flanner.
and Janet, who also came back.
Did they reconcile, though, Vidal and Mailer after that?
Oh, in a bit. I remember Gore saying, both of them were on the show, or not together. I remember Gore had said once before, I said, "Do you ever see Norman Mailer?" And he said, "Yes." You know, he said, "We're like 2 old whores who meet on the street and say, 'Still at it, Norm?' 'Yeah, still at it, Gore.' And they're cordial enough," he said. That was before this. And I don't think Gore ever totally sucked up to Norman and said, "Come over and make fudge."
My favorite story in here is about you and the talk show host when you were doing a book tour and you were interviewed by the talk show host.
Oh, this dreadful man. Yeah. That was, I have not been able to, Nabokov wanted to call his book Speak Nemazini. And his publisher said, ladies who buy books, and we counted a lot of those, and some men don't like to ask for a book they're not sure how to pronounce the title of. So they substituted the equivalent of her name for Speak Memory. But that was a diversion, wasn't it? But yeah, I was on the book tour for Cavett years ago, the book Cavett. And I met a real hostile creep somewhere in the Midwest. Sometimes I think Detroit, I'm not sure. Well, nobody warned me that he prided himself on being tough. And I was jet-lagged and fatigued and sick of the subject of the book. I'd been on a book tour a long time. And I just sort of sat there and took it.
And he had a toupee.
He did. He had false hair. And I couldn't come up with anything. I just kind of wished it was over. And I could see people sitting feeling sorry for me. And then right near the end, I just thought, well, it's now or never. And I said one of two things. I think it was this. Could I ask you a question? A guy with whatever money you must make shouldn't you be able to, afford a hairpiece that doesn't look like a wedge of blueberry pie sitting on top of your head?
Did it go up and spin around? He was so angry.
It might well have. The visual I do remember is back there behind him, seeing the control room and hearing the laughter through the glass, which is not easy, and one or two people going like this who worked with him, and then I left, leaving him 2 minutes of airtime to fill.
Oh, you walked off the set?
You said, "Now, good day, sir," or something.
I think I can't say anything more.
Just like the governor, you pulled a page out of the governor's playbook and you walked.
I pulled a Lester Maddox, knowing he only had 2 minutes, but just as Lester did, I had gotten in the whole show, almost. So that was kind of fun. I would love to have a copy of that. I don't know. That was in the days before, when hardly anyone even had a reel-to-reel home.
Yeah. What was it like when the show was over with? Were you canceled by the network? I mean, or did you stop?
Well,
the show?
I was sort of faded.
I mean, what's it like? I mean, be a famous person.
Yeah.
Everyone's watching your show. You're at the center of it all, and you're faded away.
As I always hope to hear someone say sometime, it wasn't like anything. It was unique. And that isn't even original to me. My great philosophy professor, Paul Weiss, very entertaining, was on a show of mine once with Rex Reed. And Rex Reed turned to the great philosophy professor, who was a very entertaining guy and funny, and said, "What is God like?" And Paul said, "Well, for one thing, he's not like anything. He's unique." Got a nice laugh. What was it you had asked me again?
Yeah, it was just when it ended, though. As you were saying, you're fading away, and then is there that you still want to be back in the game? What's it like suddenly being not on TV anymore?
As I was saying to my dear friend Craig Ferguson on his show 3 weeks ago, there's that point when you think, will something ever get me out of this? Particularly on Thursdays, in my case, where you just tape 2 90-minute shows with 20 minutes in between, a total of from 2 to 8 guests. And in the last 15 minutes of the second one, you couldn't name yourself. Just some automatic pilot got you through. And I was eager to do some traveling, and it didn't kill me that much. And in fact, I was sort of phased. ABC came up with an answer to the Cavett Show that would get fabulous ratings. And it was called Wide World of Entertainment. And as you can see how wide it was.
He was a massive hit.
And Jack Parr wanted to do a comeback sort of thing. And he refused to replace me for one of their 4 weeks of Wide World of Entertainment. One of the weeks would be Jack, and the others would be pastiches of everything.
And we should say Jack was your mentor.
He was my mentor and my boss, my discoverer. Yeah. And so Jack did a half hour, or did a week, mishmash stuff of Wide World of Entertainment, Cavett, mishmash, the wrong kind of programming. And I said, "Oh, that's fine. I'm still doing it some." And I never was crushed by Cavett shows had gone off several times, so you get used to it after a while. And every time, my very good friend Johnny Carson always had me on the next Monday when a Cavett show went off, and he'd say, "We're a little worried that it might be Armed Forces Radio for Richard next time."
Now you've achieved what you wanted to do originally, which was to be a guest on talk shows. That's what you do now.
I can guarantee, this sounds awful to say, that I'll be a good guest. I can never be sure I'll be a good host on any given show. Some chemistry was always in the wings that might make a show go badly not awful.
Yeah.
But I finally decided, it was like the late comic Milt Kamen used to say about his fear of flying. After 2 martinis, I don't give a damn if the plane crashes. It's not my plane. If you're a guest on a show,
That's right, exactly.
the show goes into the
Yeah. The other thing you learn, though, too, is that if the guest is good, as you have been, you, the hosts, they get all the credit for it. They say, we love your show. Yeah, it's just Dick Cavett talking.
Yeah. Isn't that funny? Why is that, I wonder? It's totally unjust.
Well, because you're doing all the heavy lifting. All right, the book is called Dick Cavett, Talk Show Conversations, Pointed Commentary and Off-Screen Secrets from Times Books. Dick, it's been a great pleasure having you on Theater Talk.
I've had a good time. There's nothing like you two.
Thank God.
Really? Are you old enough to remember Ma and Pa Kettle?
Yeah.
Whole thing.
When we get canceled, can we come on your show on Monday night?
Be there.
Okay, thank you, Dick Cavett.
See you. Thank
Pleasure.
you.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Eleanor Naylor Dana Charitable Trust, the Alan S. Gordon Foundation, the CORY and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy STRELSIN Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.